Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Saving the World podcast with Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny. Today, we're going to be talking about Hogwarts Legacy, the new video game out of Hogwarts Studios, and how it can influence the world and how it can help save the world if viewed in the right way and used in the right way. So it's been a very controversial game in some ways, probably more than almost any other game before it in some ways, with the way there's controversy from the whole rich versus poor, humans versus goblins, and of course the trans movement as well. We've seen much news and much articles on trying to boycott the game because of some of the way it portrays goblins as Jews or trans people as being inferior or not being as good as other people. So there's a lot of controversy in this game that we want to get into a little bit today. We'll try to be brief. It's going to be hard to get into the weeds. There's already tons of great articles out there, but we really wanted to just kind of scratch the surface from a save the world perspective, as how games like this and ideas like this and popular culture like this can really play a big part in making the world better if we view it in the right way and if we debate it with open minds and look at both sides. So that's why we're going to talk about today. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and please comment, subscribe, and like anything that you hear in this video. And try not to be offended if we don't agree with whatever it is you happen to agree with, or if we say something that might be taken as offensive from one side or the other. We're trying always to be middle ground here, obviously, and we're trying not to offend, but we also are trying our best to dig as deep as we can to the core of the issues and really understand what we can learn from it and how we can make the world a better place from that learning. That being said, Martin, would you like to give us your quick intro on the game, or your quick review of the game, and what you think about it?
Yeah, so as you can see, I am a reporter on location in Hogwarts, which are currently burning behind me. So I've chose that location to reflect the situation around the game a little bit. In terms of, I guess we can start with a brief review of the game, because most people within game journalism, one of the main arguments was that the big problem, and what's definitely not helping to save anything, was that there was quite a few articles or videos by mainstream game journalists which were definitely not objective at all about the game. It was a couple of 1 out of 10s for a game, even with the heading of it. I just don't remember specifically where it was. I think there was opposite sort of issues where IGN, I think, had a pretty negative review of it all the way through, and then they gave it 9 out of 10. And then there was another site, I think it was Kotaku or some other site like that, where they said at the beginning that the game was mid at best, and then they gave it 1 out of 10. So there was a lot of some even used the word unhinged reporting on the game, and it might just be the least objectively reviewed game in recent memory. Because ultimately, anybody who played the game and was objective about it had an opinion along the lines of it's good. There's nothing that you could say is extremely terrible about the game in terms of things that, as a game journalist, now regardless of politics, completely regardless of the politics in the game or around the game, the game itself has a lot of features that are competently executed. Especially if you're a Harry Potter fan, then you can do the things that you probably always wanted to do. You can walk around Hogwarts. Somebody described it as the first indoors open world game, because just the content of the Hogwarts castle, just the sort of the places you can go and the level of detail is kind of insane. So it's the first building that's pretty much an open world to itself. So even if the game was just limited to it, would be probably quite enough for many Harry Potter fans. But then there's also space around it, the surrounding hamlets and locations, which is somewhat extensive. It's not the biggest open world, where you can fly around on a broom, which is perhaps, in my opinion, the best way to fast travel along a map, and definitely the best one to explore the verticality of a map. So that by itself is a thing that hasn't been done very well or in this way in any game before. So that's pretty good. Then you have your standard puzzle solving. You have a pretty good magic combat system. So that's also a sort of a step forward. It's an iteration of the sort of Dark Souls or Sekiro general type of combat in games. in like difficult combat in single player games where you have to parry and dodge and respond at the right time, which is a fairly good model in general. But here there's also like a sort of rhythm to the spell casting where you have to keep hitting the combos of spells in the right order while you're surrounded with enemies and stuff. You get into the rhythm type stuff. And it might just be the best magic spell slinging combat system ever that's been in a game also. So for me, it's mostly an above average game in every regard. The writing maybe not the strongest, but for a AAA game with an open world, it's still pretty much standard writing. It doesn't usually get extremely better than that in these types of games anyway. And the main storyline is not the main focus of open world games. Usually it's the exploration and the side stories and stuff, which are the better part of the writing, actually the side stories with your friends. And so apart from the story, everything is above average or actually very good or maybe the best or first version of its own thing. And there's like 5 games inside of the game. You can also play Pokemon with fantastic beasts. You can be capturing magical beasts. That's additional controversy actually around this because people were criticizing it. It's like cruel to the fictional fantastic animals and stuff. But I guess then they don't know about Pokemon existing because technically it's animal fights. If you like really want to spoil the fantasy and escapism of a game like this, then sure. But then it's not a problem of Hogwarts or Harry Potter or the game in particular, this one. It's a problem of like that was invented by Pokemon franchise. So I guess you would have to think that was terrible already when it was sort of developed in a different game. So it's a combination of fairly successful game styles or types or mechanics. And for a Harry Potter fan, which I very much am, because I was growing up with Harry Potter exactly in the right years and reading the books almost like hitting the right ages. So for me, like it's actually the fantasy. So that's why I was very glad that this game was as good as it was, but also very disheartened about the controversy around it, because it's just like I can quite imagine that for many Harry Potter fans, like this is like the highlight of the year, or even like a couple of years. That is the best thing for a while that has existed, because now it's like pretty much just the Hogwarts castle in the game that you can fly around on a broom. I can't stress enough how great that is. It's pretty much as detailed or better than the VFX in the movies. It's already in the game. And I think the best way to play games like this, I have a projector. I have like actually 4K projector at this point. And if you have it on a projector, which is like 3 by 2 meters size of the screen, and you're on a broom flying around Hogwarts in like life-sized wizard or a witch, then like this is great. Even if like the game was not about nothing else. So my review, if I had to like give it a number, which I sort of hate, but let's say 8 out of 10, easily. 7 for if you're not a Harry Potter fan, like 6, not less than 6 though. Like that would be not objective in my opinion. So that's the review of the game.
Thanks so much, Martin. Just quick 2-second review from my side. I'm also a huge Harry Potter fan. Waited in line at midnight for every one of the books after they came out. A little bit older than Martin, but I remember reading them as an adult, as a 21-year-old, coming straight back from 2 years mission in Japan, having the books recommended to me. All 4 of the first ones had already come out. I read through all 4 of them pretty much in just a couple of weeks and just loved all of them so much. Every single one after that was waiting in line at the store and read within a day. So I was a huge fan all the way through. Movies as well were always huge things to see on opening day, and just being part of the culture. And no one can argue that Harry Potter has been a huge part of world culture and one of the biggest franchises ever, on par with Star Wars and all these other ones, and in some ways even bigger. You look at the Harry Potter worlds in Orlando. I just came from Orlando a couple weeks ago, and the Harry Potter worlds there are just phenomenal. They've created whole new worlds where people can just escape, from the normal world and become part of something magical all of a sudden. So I'm a huge fan of everything that Harry Potter culture has done for us, in the way that they give us something to enjoy and something to just look forward to, and a way to kind of just lose ourselves in the mystery and fantasy of life. So I love it. And I think the key concept here is, again, how can we take things like this and use them to make our world better? And how do we take stories like Harry Potter and use it to treat each other better? And you see the dynamics of the houses in Harry Potter. You see the dynamics of how all these things, all the all the friction, all the arguments, all the complaints that come from this kind of thing can actually unite us, can actually help us to become better debaters, better understanders of diversity. And so in some ways you can kind of take all the negative press a little bit with a grain of salt, but you can kind of turn it on its head and say, okay, what can we learn from the negative press that comes from a book like this? And how do we deal with, negativity in the future in a positive way?
Yeah, I think it's very much the sort of lesson here, at least like definitely from our perspective, is one of the things that we definitely should talk about regarding this. And for starters, I would like to therefore explain what was the boycott of this game about primarily. There were the arguments, but those were kind of the side arguments, or supplemental arguments, the goblins are Jewish and therefore it's somehow anti-Semitic. That's if you like. I personally have studied when I was studying media and communication studies. I specifically had a class of propaganda that I got an A from. So I know a little bit, unfortunately, about propaganda. And in propaganda, like the anti-Semitic propaganda of Nazi regime, it has to sort of meet certain criteria for it to be specifically a propaganda, meaning you're trying to do something with it. It's not just that somebody can think that a goblin kind of looks like a caricature of a Jewish person, and therefore it's exactly what those propaganda pieces with the caricatures were about. The propaganda pieces with the caricature were clearly targeted at a specific group, and they were calling to action, and the action was usually to do something terrible to them specifically. Within the Harry Potter universe, even if you assume that goblins are like a caricature of the Jewish people, somehow, because they're, I guess, greedy and they have the pointy ears and noses and teeth and stuff, then even if you sort of like accept that premise, then within the universe, they're not the bad guys. Like the universe is not arguing that they are supposed to be oppressed. Like the whole point of the general arc of the history in that universe is that the wizards, are kind of mini poops, like the sum of them, the purebloods, and they're oppressing all the other races and all the wizards who are not pureblood wizards, especially those who are so-called mudblood wizards who were born to Muggle parents, and Muggle, of course, being the non-magical person in that universe. So the whole point of the story is that you're not supposed to be a discriminating racist to anybody or like any sentient being that's different than you. Then you have the added argument that but what about house elves, which are basically like slaves? And if you again try to think about it through the lens of political realism, and you hate escapism, and you hate fantasy, and you hate folklore. Okay, I'm misrepresenting it, the position maybe slightly, but it's like these things, like goblins and the I think it's called actually brownies or something. It's called in folklore the creatures that the house elves are based on. It's like house spirits that like clean the house for you and do stuff. They exist in mythology, just like goblins exist in old mythologies in Europe. So the whole point is like these creatures sometimes have been used, like goblins, for caricatures of the groups that people didn't like, because people who are racists don't have a lot of imagination. So they just took a monster that already existed and wasn't about propaganda or whatever, and they just said, look, this group of people are monsters. And it was done with apes, it was done with gargoyles and devils or like what have you. So on some level, I think these arguments don't really hold too much water, because this is fantasy. Fantasy has a right to just take whatever from folklore for non-political purposes and just do it because it's cool as an idea. Like house elves, I don't think J.K. Rowling had some sort of political philosophy thesis about what the house elves in the universe are supposed to specifically signify, or the goblins just sort of used tropes. Yeah. Like, there's like a greedy creature from folklore, so let's use it for a banker. Like, that's a fairly simple idea. So what the controversy today was about is actually more so not about what the game is about, because like the game isn't really offensively about anything. It's very AAA in that it's sort of generally diverse, maybe slightly more than your average. Actually, there's a trans character in the game. You don't have to like specify your gender in the same narrow way for the player character that you're selecting as you do in most games. So they actually did an intentional nod to the community, because we're definitely not, our point is not to oppress the community. So there's nothing about the content of the game that if you're being at all like sort of fair, I would say is terrible or any worse than anything else within our culture. So the issue was that I guess the most reasonable version of this argument from trans activists is that J.K. Rowling owns rights for all things Harry Potter. So by consuming, like purchasing anything from the Harry Potter universe, especially now the game, I guess, you are in some way giving some money to J.K. Rowling. And J.K. Rowling has made statements that she's what's the term? I think TERF. I think it's something trans-exclusive, something feminists. Right? It's a version of feminism that's specifically about like women are just women, pretty much, is their position. And so she made a lot of public statements that were, I guess you could objectively say, ill-informed, offensive to some people for sure, that unfortunate at best. So she sort of turned from a beloved author of one of the most popular fantasy series ever to a person that people like to mostly ignore because it's just not doing great on Twitter for her personal image, let's say. So, okay, that's the argument. So then there's, of course, the issues with that. Like, okay, so we're talking about activism. So from our point of view, saving the world, what you're accomplishing is kind of important. Like, it's about the accomplishments, I would say, in a large part. Because if you're being an activist and you're doing something that's actively damaging your cause in terms of outcomes that you ideally want to happen, then I would say that's a bad strategy for you then. So, of course, in principle, you could. There's no problem with having the position of like, I don't want to financially support Rowling. Of course, every person for themselves is free to make that decision, and if they made it, I wouldn't begrudge it to anyone or would think that that's a silly kind of decision to make. Like the issue becomes when there's like a new Harry Potter game, which is like a lot of fans, is actually good. So then these people usually, these activists often, or I don't want to say necessarily like the activists were doing all the worst parts. I think that just like a lot of random people on the internet who wanted to just do something on the internet. Some of them probably trolls. A lot of them not really real activists in the real world. Were just doing a lot of essentially bullying or harassment online of people who tried to stream the game because they sort of decided like, okay, it's kind of hard to stop people from going to those parks, those like amusement parks of the Harry Potter world places. It's kind of hard to stop people from buying merch. So I guess the easiest thing we could do is to try to prevent people from playing this game. So there was even somebody created a website to track people who streamed the game so that they can be more easily harassed. I think it was the lowest point of this whole situation. It was called Have They Streamed That Wizard Game? But then the website was shut down. And so pretty much these people who like would say or claim that what they're doing is like protecting rights of people and saving them from being harassed, pretty much like the trans people, were harassing people as the like strategy to accomplish that end.
Right.
And it's the bigger issue is of like, okay, so what's more valuable to you? Excuse me. What's more valuable to a trans person in terms of accomplishing their safety and not being harassed and having the right kind of legislation passed so that they will be fine in their life and free to be themselves? Well, you need allies. You need the people who will, for instance, vote in elections in the right way. You ideally want people to give money to causes, to your cause specifically. So there were a lot of gamers who did buy the game and play the game, streamed it, reviewed it, or wanted to do so, but also wanted to do like to gather some to do a fundraiser for the trans cause at the same time. And then these activists would call them like, oh, well, that's not good enough. Like they begrudged them playing the game so much that even if they had the capacity to like, okay, they would pay $60 for the game, that some of which like percentage would go to Rowling. They had a capacity to like in one of the more extreme cases of a big streamer, like they could like hundreds of thousands of dollars, like if they did that fundraiser as they would be streaming the game. But they so discouraged that person that they decided not to stream the game at all to avoid the hassle and not to do the fundraiser. So there they've just cost yourself several $100,000 for your cause. And at that point, it's sort of, I think you need to start think like, it's sort of political philosophy or political science are sometimes annoying, but you sort of have to start thinking strategically and like ask yourself the question, what are we accomplishing? And if you're not accomplishing what your goals are, then I think you need to adjust your strategy.
Yeah, the whole phrase of shooting yourselves in the foot or biting off your nose to spite your face, as my mother always used to say, comes to mind. You know, in a pretty extreme way, that they're really just kind of, especially the most vocal ones or the most extreme, let's just call them trolls. The most extreme trolls basically are proving that whatever cause that troll is supporting is extreme, and he's not being very tolerant of other people's gaming habits or other people's things that they love. Harry Potter. If you're going to troll someone because they love Harry Potter or Harry Potter game or movie, just because the creator of that, you know, has a certain view on something, then that just, to me, says that whatever it is you're supporting isn't a very tolerant way of thinking or a very tolerant way of life. So why would you expect the mainstream or the majority of people to tolerate your belief system or your way of life when you're not tolerant of other people's ways of life, right? And I guess the word tolerance is a little bit loaded. It's a bit of a complicated word, you know, to tolerate each other's belief systems. But I think the point is that the more any kind of advocate group or extremist groups, you could apply it to climate extremism. You could apply it to, you know, any kind of wokeness, even the Black Lives Matter movement, and any movement like that, where you kind of have extreme people constantly pushing the envelope or pushing boundaries or pushing buttons wherever they can, just to kind of get attention, just to kind of say we're right and you're wrong, and this is a million reasons why we're right and you're wrong, and you should do everything we say, and even religion to some extent, of course. So all of these things come back to this lesson, I think, of tolerance and of just accepting other people's belief systems, accepting other people's habits and things that they enjoy doing as okay. You know, we have our belief system, we have our things, a way of doing things, and we choose not to play that game. If someone asks me my opinion, it would be not to play that game for these reasons. But to go out of your way and, what's the word, ostracize or
bully. I think the word is bully.
Yeah, to go out of your way to bully someone, not to play your game or to believe the way you believe for any reason, is a bad thing. And to try to say it simply, it's evil, I believe. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to push here from the whole saving the world. If we want to save the world together, we've got to move away from this concept of bullying and polarization and all the things that amount to spreading people apart. And anything that is not uniting, let's just say, anything that drives us apart is a negative kind of evil thing. So we can learn from that. We can learn from all this types of stuff and figure out ways to try to bring people together and to get all the groups to say, yeah, if you want to be effective, if you want your group to be, you know, more successful in whatever it is they're doing, you should try to be a little more tolerant and try to be a little more uniting in your methods.
Well, I would play a little bit of a devil's advocate here, I guess, because then some of these more extreme activists, I think it would also, it really stretches across all political causes. Like, it's just extremism is a general category of a type of strategy to approach politics. And one of them, or radicalism would be another term. One of them is like, if you take, for instance, Antifa, like there will be people like, oh, we need to defeat fascists who are, you know, violent and brutal and don't respect people's rights by beating them up. And so there's a point at which you're sort of starting to negate like the virtue, or at least the sort of perceived virtue of your cause, if it looks like your actions are like actively proving the sort of opposite of your intentions. And it could be about tolerance specifically. It could be about fascism or anti-fascism. It could be about environmentalism, like you said. Like, it's really every area where most people would agree that there are bad things happening and we need to address them somehow. And if your goal is for more people to get involved in the addressing of the bad things, then any extremism or radicalism is what it is causing, is like making fewer people involved in it because they don't want to be associated with the extreme, radical, violent, or bullying people. Maybe it's on some level, somewhat irrational that sort of we care about how people appear to act. Maybe there's also the argument that if you're too tolerant, like if you just don't push the envelope at all, then it just means that you've given up on some level. You have to be doing something. It's usually, I think, the main version of this argument is that the sort of extreme or more extreme right wing in the United States would keep telling, like, with the Black Lives Matter, like, of all the examples, I think the most reasonable might be still the Black Lives Matter of these, like, more sort of extreme ways of approaching the situation. Because there's also, like, a historical precedent or a current situation of actually being oppressed also as a factor to what degree. And there's also the issue of that the right wing would like nothing more than for the sort of people of color to just, not rebel or not do protests or not do anything. So we can argue about like a specific level, like in this, that sort of appropriate level that makes sense, because you need to do enough to be sort of in the public mind. You have to oppose things that are just wrong. And if they're extremely wrong, then in those cases, maybe you can oppose them extremely. Like what doesn't work about this specific example is that, like, okay, so technically, J.K. Rowling is already plenty rich. If you want to sort of depower someone by boycotting them so that they don't get money, you kind of have to do it before they get a lot of money. Because once they get a lot of money, that strategy no longer does anything. Like if J.K. Rowling never made another penny, she would still be wealthy and influential. So the problem with this approach also is that it would never occur to you to boycott them before they're rich and wealthy and powerful.
Yeah.
Like so this strategy sort of inherently doesn't work. And so another thing is like you to be successful, even in theory, it's not enough for people to not just play this game. They would have to stop buying the merch, stop buying the books, stop paying anything for the movies. No more movies or games or books in that universe would have to ever be made. People would have to stop going to those parks. It's just all across the board. And only then it would start to do anything. And even then, probably it wouldn't do anything really, even if it worked 100%, because it's too late for that whole, like the whole Hogwarts Express of J.K. Rowling being rich has just left the station. It's like currently going into Magic Land. Like there's just nothing, even like on this whole level. And also the issue is it's not her game. Like she is one of like I don't know how many people who make some money off of it, but she just signed off on like, yeah, you can make it. She doesn't even have any sort of creative input. And most importantly, I think that we need to discuss it. Like the people sort of that's just bad argumentation. Like the people who want to oppose this try to oppose every single aspect of it. The game must be bad. Harry Potter must have always been bad and silly and not worth anything, and always had to be extremely discriminating and intolerant. And like everything J.K. Rowling ever said has to be a complete waste and terrible and not helpful to anybody. And it's just, that's bad argumentation because that's unrealistic. Like J.K. Rowling still is a relatively liberal progressive person. She just specifically isn't for trans rights. Like other than that, she and that's reflected in the books. She's very much against racism. She is a feminist. She is like for various rights of various oppressed and discriminated groups. And that's why the content of this universe, it's actually of all the big ones of Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, what's other you think that
Marvel.
it doesn't?
Yeah, even Marvel.
And something Marvel, for instance. It's like of all of these, Harry Potter is actually the most anti-discrimination, most inclusive and diverse universe. Even like specifically appealing to people who have this mindset or are actually different from the norm in any way. Like that's actually the best place for them. So from my point of view, much more effective approach would be to say, sure, but realize the game is good. So it just makes you look silly if you say it's bad. And the universe clearly matters to people. It's one of the most successful ones. So hating on it also just looks silly. So how about let's keep arguing that, well, maybe in the context of the Harry Potter universe, Rowling has essentially become Dolores Umbridge type character.
Right.
And so what the message of the books is, which is way more powerful than whatever she can say on Twitter, is clearly against what the points she's trying to make on Twitter. So by making it actually helping the world be more powerful and effective and people be engaging with it more, it's way more likely to actually indoctrinate people into being more tolerant of diversity and more against discrimination.
Yeah. I will not tell lies.
Yeah, I must not tell lies.
I must not tell lies. I must not tell lies. I 100% agree. I think it's definitely an opportunity missed for, let's just say, the trans movement in general and many other movements that have come out kind of against this, trying to boycott it. They could have instead embraced the game for what it was and used it as a learning opportunity to maybe, say what they wanted to say about J.K. Rowling specifically and some of the things she said specifically. But it doesn't mean boycott a great game that's teaching good lessons to people and is encouraging us to be more tolerant and more understanding of the world around us. So, yeah, I think a lot to be said there. So thanks so much, Martin, for your detailed analysis. I think you said it way better than I ever could. And I think, again, the core concept here is that there is a lot more to these games than meets the eye. It exists, doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists everywhere in the world, kind of all at the same time. It's become a part of who we are. It's a part of our culture. It's a part of our hearts. So everything that we can kind of learn and embrace about it to make ourselves better and our world better is actually a net positive. And any kind of boycotting and bullying, they're kind of net negatives. They're kind of, taking away from the purity and the fun of the fantasy and how do we use magic to shape our world to make it better.
Yeah, it also just reminded me the pretty much silliest aspect of this whole line of argumentation is that I guess the argument ultimately is like, how about we just end Harry Potter forever? And it just, yeah, sure. And additionally saying that, well, it's such an easy ask to just not play a game. So it's like ultimately just such an easy ask to end Harry Potter forever. It's just, sure, like so it would be very easy and very simple ask to end Star Wars or to end Lord of the Rings. Like, why wouldn't we just stop doing those things? Like burn all the books, I guess, or never make any more movies or games and just like end those like things. Like how easy is that?
Yeah, it's in some ways it's the trying to make robots out of all of us too, right? Where we don't have the ability to choose what we want to do because we've all been brainwashed so much by whatever to be so. I guess it's kind of like the woke movement in some ways being asleep. Right, and it's counterintuitive in some ways, where the more they try to wake people up to force them to see things their way, they're actually kind of putting the blinders on, actually seeing the world for what it is, and actually seeing the diversity and beauty in the diversity. So I think it's extremely important to always bring that back to the middle. The pendulum goes both ways so fast sometimes that we always got to try to focus on that middle ground to understand both extremes and find some kind of happy medium that both extremes can be somewhat okay with and find a way forward together. So
yeah, it's with these movements, like one of the issues is like what was the quote from like the Dark Knight? You either die a hero or you'll live long enough to see yourself become the villain type thing. Because I think like some of the people who haven't thought about it maybe a lot, who are trying to be active or activists in this area and end up bullying people, is that they sort of assume that their position is inherently virtuous. Therefore, anything that they do in pursuit of however they perceive, like in pursuit of betterment of the cause, is therefore also virtuous. But then I think you have to think about in terms of political philosophy, because actually my expertise is like directly to comment on this issue, because not only am I a big Harry Potter fan who grew up with it, but also my degrees are media and communication studies and political philosophy. So this is like perfectly within my wheelhouse. So you kind of have to ask yourself about or consider the whole dimension of the means that you're using. And like you could go for the ends justify the means route, but then you can't expect to have a lot of sympathy or garner a lot of sympathy. And if your movement, because it's actually one of the more annoying aspects of reality in this case, but not all political movements have the same ease with which they can sort of convert or recruit people. And in this case, if you do this sort of identity-based politics in general, then you've sort of already chosen, especially if you decide to be extreme about it, you've basically narrowed down or decreased the maximum possible amount of people who can even hypothetically be part of your movement. Like I'm a cis white male, so I'm pretty much like we both are. We're outside of the group of people like by birth. Like there's like, I guess I would have to decide that I'm trans and like do a surgery on myself or whatever, but that's completely unrealistic for as a solution to this situation. So like the movements like the trans movement inherently can't be like directly the biggest issue of one's life, or the important issue for not definitely a majority of the population, but maybe not even significant like plurality of the population. Like if you are, for instance, a communist and that's your socialist, you can convert pretty much anybody who's not rich. And so your cap at like how many people can be directly part of the movement is like upwards of 90% of the population of the world, pretty much. So there, like you can, if you choose to do more extreme tactics, you can still be generally successful and take over a country. Like if you are a member of the trans movement and your goals ultimately aren't logically to take over the world or anything, your goals are just like to ensure my personal safety, security, and well-being. So in that sense, you very much rely on allies. Like that's your ultimate, the core of your strategy is supposed to be to garner sympathy. So whatever it is that you're doing that's not getting you more sympathy from the mainstream people is actively a bad idea strategically. And like I can like have various opinions of this fact, but this is a political science fact. Yeah. In this situation, and I very much support like the trans rights. Like if a person has a conception of who they are and want to realize that in a way that doesn't actually directly harm other people, is like all the power to them. So it's like I'm like naturally philosophically an ally to this movement, but because I played Hogwarts Legacy and I liked it, then like there would be a bunch of people who would describe me as an unreliable ally, a bad ally, or an ally I don't want. It's just like, but I'm still going to like 100% vote in every election in a way that's going to maximize like the rights for people, including like all of the people who could be discriminated, because I'm against discrimination. And that's also why I feel quite at home in the Harry Potter universe, which is like the whole story on the hero is for that. So I just still think like it's important to, and trying to be very specific and precise. It's just like, this is what I'm saying because I want to constructively contribute and help like the community as like you would say a political strategist. Like if they hired me as like they had a political party and they hired me because I have the education or whatever the expertise and asked me for my expert opinion, like what they should be doing to win, then that this is what I would say. And like I don't have to like it, nobody has to like that it is this way, but it really is like this is the core of like my message about this whole situation.
Thank you, Martin. I think that says it all right there. As far as the reason we're really doing this video is to kind of try to clarify those things and bring people together, bring these sides together, and show us how we can have kind of the win-win of accepting certain games like this or certain movies like this at the same time as building up support for whatever cause you're working for, without alienating people, without being a bully, or without being an extremist. So I think that applies at just about everywhere you can imagine. And I think that says it all. So thanks so much for joining us today. I think we're pretty close to wrapping up. Is there any final thoughts or comments you'd like to throw out there for everyone, Martin?
Well, I was trying to think of some like quote from Harry Potter universe, but I don't think I can find any applicable one. Just maybe don't be Dolores Umbridge.
Don't be Dolores Umbridge. I like that. That's a pretty good way to wrap it up. And of course, enjoy the game. The recommendation from both of us is, play whatever games you like, but play it with a mindful attitude of how it affects you and how you can take whatever lessons you learn from everything you do to make the world a better place. And that being said, let's move forward and save the world together. Thanks so much for joining us today, guys. We'll see you again soon.